Good evening, and welcome to the Commonwealth Club of California. My name is Kalideep Chaudhary, and I'm here to celebrate and welcome the Year of the Dragon. A special welcome to all of you, including our online participants. This program is a focus on China from the Asia Pacific Affairs Forum, and is being recorded and live streamed on the Commonwealth Club's YouTube channel and will be available for download later on at commonwealthclub.org. Thank you for joining us. We encourage you to become a member of the club, and to learn more, please visit the club's website. Let us begin. China has always played an outsized role in the history of the world. Ever since its civilization began on the banks of the Yangtze River, China has been capturing the imagination as few countries have. But the rise of modern China is especially astonishing. It is without parallel in modern history. More than 800 million people have been lifted out of poverty, 75% of the world's global poor. In 1990, 75% of China lived in rural areas. Now, 75% are urban. And here's another astonishing number for you. Between 2010 and 2013, more concrete was poured in China than in the entire 20th century of the United States. That's a mind-boggling number. But it's not just concrete and steel alone. Just when California is backing away from its subsidies on renewable energy, China is now moving ahead. 50% of the world's electrical cars are either manufactured or consumed in China. 50% of the world's solar and wind energy is manufactured and consumed in China. But there are challenges ahead. China is emerging from a long COVID lockdown, and the questions remain, what impact will that have on its economy? And for the first time, China's population is contracting rather than expanding. It is an aging population. How will that affect China? And therefore, how will those ripples affect the rest of the world, affect the United States, and affect us here in California? And so we are very pleased and honored that Ambassador Zhang Zemin has agreed to join us on stage and present us his views on how China plans to address those challenges. And afterwards, thanks to his generosity, you're all welcome to join us in a celebration of the Chinese New Year, the Year of the Dragon, with regional Chinese cuisine and alcohol. So let us begin. So Ambassador Zhang, welcome to the Commonwealth Club of America. Please tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to this position.
Thank you, Kalideep, for your warm welcome. And thank you, members of Commonwealth Club, both here on site and online, for your interest in China and Chinese culture. Let me start by extending to you the best wishes to you all for the Chinese New Year, the Year of the Dragon. It's a very auspicious year, and hope it will bring all of us the best of luck and good fortune. As far as myself is concerned, I've been in this job as Chinese Consul General based in San Francisco for 1 year and 8 months now. And before that, I served as Chinese ambassador to the Czech Republic for 3.5 years. I joined the Chinese Foreign Service in the year 1990, and my first visit to this country was in 1994. And I also served in the Chinese Embassy in DC from 2009 to 2011. And in my job working in the headquarters of the Chinese Foreign Ministry, I've had the good fortune of serving many important visits and discussions. So I hope I could put all these experience into good use and do a good job in promoting more mutual understanding and friendship between China and the US as a whole, and in particular, between China and California. Thank you.
Have there been any surprises? What have you learned about California? What have you learned about the West Coast during your time here?
I feel I'm very lucky because in the West Coast, it has a longer history of exchanges and cooperation with China. It recently hosted APEC and has such a wonderful, hardworking Chinese community, which made important contribution to prosperity of this part of America. So ever since I arrived, I've been very encouraged by the cooperation exchanges between California in particular with China. For instance, we are about to celebrate the Year of the Dragon, the Chinese Spring Festival. And in September 2022, Governor Newsom signed into law that Spring Festival will be honored as a public holiday. And that was the first state to designate Spring Festival as a public holiday. And you mentioned the pandemic earlier in your opening remarks. Governor Newsom was also the first US governor to visit China in the wake of the pandemic. And that was a trip with a focus on climate change. And I think the visit was a great success. And also, the West Coast has served as the host city for 2 APECs. The first APEC took place in Seattle in 1993. And last year, San Francisco played very successfully host to APEC. Chinese president came, and the 2 presidents also had a very successful summit, which give people much needed confidence in the future of our relationship.
Thank you. Thank you. You raised some very important points. Let us talk about the future of your relationship. 2024 marks the 45th year of friendship between the United States and China. It has not been without its challenges. How do you perceive the current state of affairs with China, with the United States?
This year marks, as you said, the 45th anniversary of China-US relationship. It has not been without challenges, ups and downs, but viewed as a whole, the relationship has made significant headway. It has brought lots of tangible benefits to the people of the 2 countries. It has also contributed to peace, stability, and prosperity throughout the world. I often recall the ice-breaking visit by President Nixon in 1972, together with Dr. Kissinger. President Nixon also visited my hometown, Hangzhou, where much of the negotiation on Shanghai Communique was done, and it was finished actually in Hangzhou, but signed in Shanghai. Hangzhou is not very far from Shanghai. What I want to say is that when President Nixon visited Hangzhou, he gave Hangzhou some gifts on behalf of the United States. The gifts were 5 planted saplings of redwood trees. Over the past 5 decades and more, the tiny tree, tiny saplings, have grown into tall trees in the botanic garden and in the parks around the West Lake. I think this illustrates well the evolution of China-US relationship over the past decades. When we established formal diplomatic ties in 1979, there was hardly any mutual investment. But last year, two-way investment amounted to $260 billion US. In 1979, our trade was less than $2.5 billion US, and last year, the figure already increased to nearly $760 billion US. So our relationship has been, I think, intertwined in almost every aspect. Cultural exchanges, people-to-people exchanges, economic exchanges. So as someone has told me, we are two major economies now. Neither can ignore the other side. So I think the progress of the relationship has been real. And anyone who have objective view and fair-minded people would recognize the positive impacts of the progress of our relationship to the two countries and to the whole world. Many countries around the world actually are also concerned about the health of China-US relationship, because the way the two countries interact would also affect their way of life and work. So that's the reason why people were so happy to see our two presidents talking to each other, reaching important consensus on so many important issues. This time, the two presidents actually agreed on having dialogue, having more exchanges on important subjects. The Chinese president, in particular, wanted the US side to work together with China to make sure that the two major countries can get along well with each other. And the Chinese proposal was and continues to be that as two major countries, we need to show mutual respect. We need to live together in peace, and we need to engage in win-win cooperation. I think cooperation is the only way forward for the benefit of our two countries and in the interest of the whole world.
Thank you. As you know, the IMF recently released a report that said any strains in the relationship will affect the global economy.
Exactly.
Your thoughts on that? Exactly.
That's also the reason why people are so concerned about tension in the relationship. Once there is tension in China-US relationship, it could affect, I think, 2 percentage points of economic growth. For more than a decade, China has been a key engine of world economic growth. We have contributed to 30% of economic growth globally every year. So if China and the United States, as the two leading economies, are not cooperating with each other, then it would disrupt the stability in supply chain, in industrial chain. So just at the time when we need such cooperation to restore economic growth around the world, tension would actually bring about disaster for the whole humanity.
Thank you. But nevertheless, a fear persists here in America. And in fact, a poll conducted in last October by the Chicago Council of Foreign Affairs that said 60% of Americans feel that China's rise as a global power is a threat to peace. How do you, in your role, address those concerns?
I think they don't understand the Chinese culture, Chinese people, Chinese government's policy well enough. In part, it's perhaps because of the COVID pandemic. You know, over the past 3 years, there were not much exchanges. People stopped visiting each other. So this has given rise to lots of mutual understanding. People didn't have enough opportunity to explain to each other what they really think. Before the pandemic, we had 5 million mutual visits every year, more than 300 direct flights per week across the Pacific between China and the United States. So we have a lot of catch-up work to do to make up for the losses caused by the pandemic. But there are also other factors at play. To me, forgive my bluntness, I think this has also got a lot to do with the political correctness in this country. Some politicians tend to politicize everything. So they're spreading those kind of fear and unwarranted and wrong accusations. That's the reason why when Chinese President Xi Jinping talked to President Joe Biden recently, he said that we need to work together to do several things. The very first one is to develop a correct perception of each other. China should be viewed as a partner rather than an enemy, and China's development should be viewed as opportunity rather than a threat. We are more than happy to share with the rest of the world the opportunity of growth and prosperity. You mentioned China's progress in renewable energy, in zero-emission cars, in solar energy, etc. For 6 years in a row, in Shanghai, every November, from November the 5th to the 10th, if I remember correctly, China would invite people around the world, including from California, the Bay Area Council, to take part in the first ever Import Expo. I don't think other countries have ever done something like that. We want to take advantage of China's growth to share in the prosperity and opportunity of growth with the rest of the world.
Thank you. Let us now, you mentioned APEC, let us touch on APEC very briefly because first of all, congratulations to you for organizing a very successful APEC. And you mentioned President Xi Jinping, he had identified 5 pillars of cooperation with the United States. How did, in your view, did the APEC conference conclude? And do you think that those 5 pillars of cooperation, which also includes people-to-people contact, how do you see yourself in your role in facilitating those pillars of cooperation?
Yeah, thank you for mentioning the 5 pillars. I already mentioned the first one, that is to jointly develop a right perception of each other. Then it's jointly manage the differences in an effective way, jointly advance mutually beneficial cooperation, jointly shoulder international responsibilities as 2 major countries, and last but not the least, jointly promote cultural and people-to-people exchanges. So for me, I think this is a lot of work, you know, very demanding task, but I'm happy to do my best to fulfill my duty as Chinese Consul General. People-to-people exchanges is of utmost importance. President Xi Jinping, in his speech during his stay in San Francisco, extended an invitation to 50,000 American youth to visit China in the next 5 years. I think when you see China with your own eyes, it could, give you exposure to a real China, and you could make your own conclusion. How does your own observation differ from or match with the information you get from watching news or reading some of the newspapers or hearing the remarks from some politicians? So it's very important. And China is, as I said, doing a lot of trade with the United States. And trade basically is mutually beneficial, give consumers more choice. It creates jobs, it improves living standards. So win-win cooperation is really something that can help stabilize the relationship. And today's world is confronted with so many urgent challenges: climate change, pandemic, geopolitical tension. Both China and the United States are permanent members of the UN Security Council. Both have a role to play in making the world a better place for all. So I think the 5 pillars are really very important. The priority now is for us. When I say us, I mean both China and the United States, to work in concert, to work hand in hand to implement what the 2 presidents have agreed, rather than saying one thing but doing another. And then it could lead to setbacks and very frustrating.
Thank you. Thank you for the answer. Maybe I should now switch to California. California and China and the Chinese people have a very long history. In fact, some might argue that California was built on the back of Chinese labor. What most people don't know is that China is California's largest trading partner. You mentioned that Governor Newsom had been to China. Could you tell us a little bit about that visit and what the outcomes were and what it means to our audience?
Governor Newsom led a climate change delegation to China in October. And he started his trip from Hong Kong, where he gave a talk on climate change. Then he visited Shenzhen, one of the first cities that opened up and conducted reform economically. So in Shenzhen, Governor Newsom visited electric bus by BYD. And he then went to Guangzhou, where he signed agreement on climate change cooperation with Guangzhou. By the way, California enjoys sister state-province relationship with Guangdong, with Jiangsu, with Inner Mongolia, with Sichuan. And he also visited Shanghai, visited Jiangsu, and he visited Beijing. In Beijing, he also had meetings with many counterparts to have a seminar on climate change. Most important of all, he had a meeting with Chinese president. And President Xi, in his meeting with Governor Newsom, said that the vigor and vitality of our relationship comes from subnational exchanges. So China welcomes the visit by Governor Newsom, and China is prepared to strengthen subnational exchanges, meaning between the provinces and the states in the United States and between the counties and the cities. I feel that the governors and mayors speak alike because in their everyday work, they have to deal with the same issue, jobs, environment, food, housing. So I think if we can enable the governors, the mayors of the 2 countries to meet each other often, then the kind of misunderstanding that you mentioned earlier could disappear. Maybe not totally disappear, but will not stand in the way of efforts to advance mutually beneficial cooperation, because differences are always there. When Nixon visited China, China and US were so different, vastly different. But we were able to come together by finding common ground. I think this remains true today.
Thank you. Quick question, which is relevant to California. Before the revolution in 1948, 20% of China's population was educated. 100 million out of 400 million. Now it's close to 100%. How can California's universities' educational system play a role in helping with that educational transfer, exchange?
California is very strong in education. For instance, you have Stanford, you have Berkeley, you have UC Davis, you have many other, wonderful universities. And I think when I was a student, my teacher told me that if you have an apple, I have an apple, we exchange, then still you have only 2 apples, right? If you have an idea, I have an idea, then we can have, more ideas. So I think this is the same with education. If people can come together to share ideas, to compare notes and learn from each other, the Chinese students would also enrich the classroom here because they will bring with them Chinese culture, Chinese way of thinking, Chinese philosophy, which might also prove useful and give American students and students from other countries inspiration. At the same time, the Chinese students here would also draw inspiration from their peers from other cultures. So we want to see more robust educational exchanges. But unfortunately, I feel that because of the political correctness, we have come across some obstacles in such exchanges. For one thing, we are simplifying visa application procedures. My office committed to be exchange-friendly, meaning we are 24/7. If you have an issue, if you request assistance, then we would open our office to meet your need and facilitate your visa application. But for the Chinese applicants in Beijing and other Chinese cities, the queue is too long. And now we promise to the public that we'll be able to give you visa in 4 working days. And no need for prior appointment. And we hope that the US side can also do more to meet the need of the aspiring students.
Thank you. Thank you. Let us talk about the exchange of ideas. What many people in our audience might not be aware, as Ambassador Zhang just mentioned, the world's largest electrical car manufacturing company is not Tesla, it's BYD. And China is unique, is that it controls the entire supply chain, from cobalt mining to robots manufacturing electrical cars. It is also true that once upon a time, China learned, which is one of the ambassador's favorite subjects, green policy. It learned a lot about green policy from California and from the United States. But now the tables have switched. The student has now become the teacher. What can California learn from China on green policy?
I think that it's a two-way learning process. Each will bring to the table its unique strength. And I think if we have this kind of positive learning from each other, this kind of positive attitude to learn from each other, both sides will benefit. We have been very aggressive in imposing requirements on green energy. So, for instance, in Hainan province, all the cars, have to be without climate warming emission. I think in this field, there's really a lot of room for mutual learning.
Thank you. Let us now talk about climate change. And interesting facts. In 1990, there were about 2 refrigerators for every 100 households in rural China. And that number is now 90. In 1990, there were about 15 air conditioners for every 100 households in China. That number is now 150. This has a severe effect on electricity consumption and on emission of greenhouse gases. The United States and China together emits more than 40% of the world's greenhouse gases. I've talked a lot about renewable energy, solar energy, but it is also true that 60% of China's electricity comes from coal plants, and that is growing as it meets the demand of its ever-growing population. How do you see, from your perspective, given your own passionate cause in climate change and renewable, how do you see a country like China balance the needs of a modernizing population? Because obviously the rest of the world will see China as an example in how China has dealt with these issues.
Economic growth is important because it has a direct bearing on jobs and people's living standards. But environmental protection is also important, and increasingly so. So how to balance is really a demanding job. As far as China is concerned, we've announced our goals to achieve carbon neutrality and the car peak, and actually China spends less time than what it would take other industrialized countries to achieve the same target. What I'm proud of is China's track record in reducing per unit GDP energy consumption. For the past years, China's economy has grown significantly. But on average, for 6% of GDP growth, the energy per unit GDP energy consumption actually grew at only above 3%, meaning we are growing in a more environmental friendly way. So I think the Chinese people are now more and more aware of the needs of environmental protection and climate change. When I go back to visit my hometown and visit other Chinese cities, actually one big change, or the biggest change I've noticed, is the environment. The river has, the water in the river has become much, cleaner, has become more clean. In the past, when I grew up, when I was a little boy, I grew up near a small stream, a small river, a branch, a tributary of the Grand Canal. It was very near to a textile mill and very close to a paper-making factory. So the color of the water in the river kept changing. At that time, I didn't know much about environmental protection. Even though it smelled, I thought it was quite, romantic to see the color change. But now when I go back, I saw people fishing, in the same river. So this is really a very big change. for the time being, China's national parliament, our Congress, usually have its annual session in March. At the provincial level, the provincial legislatures usually meet before the Spring Festival. So in these days, you can see that various provinces are having their provincial parliamentary session. And I tuned in TV one day, and I heard one governor from Fujian. He said that he reiterated their commitment that if he finds there are contradiction between a certain project of economic development and the need of environmental protection, he would give more priority to environment. So if he couldn't feel comfortable that the project will not hurt environment, then he would rather not have the project and keep the environment in good shape. I think this reflects the change of focus, change of priority. So even though China, still have a lot of work to do for instance, keep progressing in its environmental protection endeavor, we are now more determined than ever to strike a better balance.
Thank you. Thank you. I also started by talking about China's population. For the first time in history, recorded history, China's population is shrinking rather than expanding. How do you feel that this have an effect on China's economy?
I sometimes think of my son. How many children would he be willing to have after he gets married? I have two elder sisters. My wife and I, we have only one child. So it's not surprising that the population is shrinking because of the policy over the past years. Now we are introducing readjustment to the policy, and we are encouraging the young couples to have more than just one. Better two, preferably 3, even better. However, it's not an issue of only seen in China that the young people are not that enthusiastic in having many children. I understand that they lead a fast-paced life, and they are working or living under more pressure than we or our parents' generation, my parents' generation. But still, even though China's population is shrinking, we need to recognize that in terms of its educated population, its effective workforce, its a pool of talents, it's not really shrinking that much. So I think number-wise, it's shrinking. But talent-wise, it's still growing, thanks to progress in education. But of course, we are seeing the aging population. And for instance, my mother-in-law, because my wife and I are working here, and my wife's sister, my sister-in-law, she's a professor, and she's also very busy. So how to take care of her mom is a demanding task, for us, and I think other Chinese households probably face the same dilemma. So we need to develop more elderly care facilities. We need to further develop China's medical service so that when people age, they can still be well taken care of. So I think we are also learning from the experience of other countries. And this can also be an area where China and the US can have dialogue, share experience, and learn from each other. It's not just a challenge for China. I think it's also a challenge for many other economies.
It is. In fact, Ambassador Zhang, the example that is most usually thrown out is the example of Japan, which in the 1990s went through a similar process. And the question remains, has Japan advanced beyond that stage? So what have you learned from your studying of history as how Japan addressed that and how China can address that?
As I said, we see the population aging. So I mentioned earlier that we need to develop more aggressively the elderly care facilities, senior people's house, and we also need to do a better job in social security arrangements so that to develop more insurance. I think we in China have philosophy of taking care of the elderly. So it's a very important task for not just the government, but also ordinary citizens in China.
So also as China is making the transition from being the manufacturing center of the world to perhaps the center of innovation, I think there are some that an audience might not be aware of because there's a feeling that whatever the United States does, that China copies. But now it seems that the reverse is also happening. And I'll cite a couple of examples. That Facebook copied WeChat. WeChat very early on had a payment option for a session. And Facebook copied that 5 years afterwards. And no one raised an eyebrow. Everyone is familiar with TikTok. And obviously, a few years later, Instagram came up with its own module for TikTok. So how do you see, you've raised a very good point on that the population may be aging, but more and more educated people are coming to the fore. How do they play in this innovative to drag China into the next century?
People in China are proud of their innovation in the past. Paper-making technology, the compass, the fireworks, etc. And today, China is home to more than 400,000 high-tech companies. And also, China has the second largest number of unicorns. So innovation is getting more and more prevalent in China. China enjoyed sustained economic growth over the past decades. We used to have double-digit growth as a result of opening up and reform. And now the size of the economy has become already so big that we are making a shift to quantity-focused growth to quality-focused growth. So we have to rely on innovation. China has benefited from exchanges and opening up with outside world. And at the same time, China is also making contribution to the well-being of people in other countries through our own innovation. Talking about intellectual property rights protection, it's not because other countries want us to do this. It's actually, out of our own interests. We have to enforce intellectual property rights, laws and regulations. We have set up tribunals on intellectual property rights. So if you look at the number of application of patents, copyrights protection cases, the number is very encouraging. So here, California is, I think is a pioneer in innovation in so many areas. So it's always mutually beneficial for the Chinese young people in particular to work together with their American counterparts and have brainstorming and draw inspiration from each other.
Thank you. By the way, I'm sorry for being distracted, Ambassador Zhang. I've never seen so many questions come in. And so I have to sort through them, read them while talking to you at the same time. So please forgive me. But a subject that has come up, which is also there at the APEC conference, is your Belt and Road Initiative. Could you explain to the audience what the Belt and Road Initiative is?
The Belt and Road Initiative is about China's cooperation with countries from the hinterland to the west, so that's on the belt, and that's on the road part. And also on the sea, we have the maritime Silk Road. So this initiative has been there for 10 years, and it has actually drawn lots of support from countries along the routes. And together, they have created infrastructure projects, production projects, which created jobs and lift the living standards of the people along the routes. We want this Belt and Road Initiative to be a public good initiative. And we want to give the opportunity to other countries to use China's experience for reference. And I think we are doing a good job. We have had several summit meetings about the Belt and Road Initiative. And this initiative is open to all. So for anyone who is interested in joining, they are more than welcome to join us.
And so that is one of the questions from the audience. It is as a former elected official. The question is from the United States, how can China work in its Belt and Road Initiative with perhaps some of the urban communities in California? How do you see that in your role? Is a potential opportunity for that?
For the urban
communities in California?
For the urban communities in California, I think smart city could be, a very good topic where the urban dwellers and the Chinese, city management can work together. How to build more energy-saving apartments, for example. I think city planning is a very important subject, and there's so much to discuss. Public transport, for instance. And one subject that is in headline every day is artificial intelligence. So I think this is also an area where people, engineers, students in different countries can have more discussion on, because artificial intelligence is growing very fast. It's attracting so much investment, and it's revolutionary, and it will probably, I think, it will definitely affect every aspect of our lives. But how can it be governed? How can it be properly managed so that we can maximize the positive impacts and prevent potential risks and dangers? I think this is on everybody's mind. So this could also be a subject where people can work together on.
Thank you. I will now depend a lot on your diplomatic skills to answer the next question.
I'll try.
Which is coming on. Elections in the United States are coming up very shortly. How does it affect? How how does the paths change with different candidates? How do you, in your position, address to meet that?
First of all, China, that's your election. And we don't interfere in other countries', domestic politics. But having said that, China-US relationship is so important that it affects us all. So we certainly hope that people vote for someone who would contribute to a better China-US relationship. And I think what makes me happy is that if you look back on the past 45 years of China-US relationship, it has been the consensus of both parties to develop a good China-US relationship. Nixon, he broke ice by visiting China in 1972. And it was President Carter who formally established diplomatic ties. And since then, you've had presidents from both parties, having exchanges with their Chinese counterparts, visiting President Bush, 41 and 43, they visited China, Clinton, Obama, Trump, Biden. I think it's in the interests of people of the two countries and the people of the whole world for our two countries to have a stable and cooperative relationship. And I think the whole world expects responsibility from elected officials to work towards a better relationship.
Thank you. You mentioned Governor Newsom's visit to China, but that was built on previous visits, starting from Republican governors who have visited China to build up this. One of the questions from the audience is, what is your suggestion for the next stage of development between California and China?
I think we have a lot to do. For instance, let's start with the student exchanges. President Xi invites 50,000 American young people to visit China in the next 5 years. And we believe California could account for, many out of the 50,000. And we also hope that there will be more direct flights between California and China. Bay Area Council every year runs the Californian Pavilion on behalf of the entities or businesses from California in the International Import-Expo in Shanghai every year. So we hope that it can also do more to introduce more American products and services to China. In the next 5 years, China will import a total of 17 trillion goods and $1 trillion of goods and services from the rest of the world. So the market demand from a growing economy like China's is huge. And the Chinese people, as they improve their living standards, also want to enjoy more Napa Valley wine, more sun-kissed orange. So I think we can do more trade, and we can have more cooperation on climate change and work together on those pressing global challenges together.
Thank you. Another question to test your diplomatic skills. There's an increasing concern in California about North Korea's military might. And people in California especially feel that they are within range of the missile, that program that North Korea has. What is China's role? What is China's responsibility in ensuring the safety, given that how that affects peace in the world?
North Korea is a sovereign country, so it's responsible for its own conduct. China and the DPRK are close neighbors, and we have normal friendship and cooperation, very close ties. So we want their economy to grow, and we want their people to enjoy a good life. At the same time, because of the tension between the DPRK and some other countries, you see incidents, you see tension emerge from time to time. But for us, we always call for peaceful settlement of disputes, and we always call for dialogue between the parties concerned. I've been involved in, at the beginning it was 4-party talks, then it was 6-party talks. We want to bring about permanent peace. We want there to be peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. But it depends on really efforts from each and every one of the stakeholders. So we hope that the United States would also play a more constructive and helpful role in this regard to stabilize the situation.
Thank you. Early on when you first started, you mentioned the rise of artificial intelligence. We talked about potentially fake news. You also talked about getting access. You talked about the political environment and how that affects the news that we get here in America. If you were an audience member, what sources would you rely on to get an accurate description of China?
Of course, I would rely on China's own news. We have many good news agencies like Xinhua News Agency, China Daily, People's Daily, CGTN, CCTV. They are all, very international now. And I also draw on credible news agencies. But most important thing is you need to check what you read with the facts on the ground. So sometimes you do see fake news. And we have one program in CGTN, and actually it's called Headline Busting, something like that. It would expose the fallacies. Some people, some correspondents use outdated pictures, and some would use a picture of one country to talk about things happening in another country, and that could be very misleading. And artificial intelligence, which has been blamed for deep faking, I think is a challenge for all of us. So how to work together to make sure that AI could be used in a responsible way, not to let AI be used in such a way that it will mislead people, misguide people, is something that needs to be taken very seriously.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Zhang. We have a personal question for you. And the personal question is, many people here in the Bay Area are not used to seeing people from the foreign service, or the diplomatic service. There are quite a few people over here of Chinese origin. How do you encourage people to follow in your footpath to get in the foreign service such as yourself?
I think it's my honor to serve my country as a diplomat. And here in San Francisco, everyone is proud of the Golden Gate Bridge. And diplomacy is actually about building bridges rather than erecting barriers. We do solve problems, but we solve problems by building bridges, by avoiding conflicts, by making necessary compromise through bringing about better mutual understanding. So I think it's a noble job. There's no higher honor than representing your country and serving not just the interests of your own countrymen, but also the common interests of the people on this planet. If you are not in foreign service, sometimes when you talk about some big jargons like world peace, stability, sound so distant and hollow. But if you have been engaged in diplomacy for years, then you do feel the sense that you show the heavy responsibility. What you do, one way or another, does affect the future of the world. I've served in my job as interpreter between summit meetings. And when I look back, I always feel that what an honor to serve as a bridge in promoting mutual understanding between the two countries and between the two peoples. So I think, actually, when I go back to China, I often get invited by our Human Resources Department to talk to university students, to share with them my story and how it is important for the young people to have a dream of serving the country and serving mankind through foreign service. I think we need to have more people. After all, no matter how advanced AI gets, people still need to rely on human intelligence. And we still need to have a face-to-face dialogue to solve problems and to make progress on mutually beneficial things.
So one last question, and this will severely test your diplomatic skills. And it is a question from the audience, is how does the San Francisco Zoo get access to a couple of pandas? You've talked about building bridges, you talked about moving results. So,
yeah. President Xi, in his remarks, talked about how pandas are loved by people in this country, especially the children. And the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has already announced that panda will be coming back to California. I've visited San Francisco Zoo. It's a very nice zoo near Ocean Beach. And so let's wait and see. And I know, the mayor and the governor and lieutenant governor, are all very enthusiastic about getting panda back into California. So I'm also looking forward to seeing that happen.
Wonderful. And we will hold the ambassador to his promise. And with
Let's work together.
Thank you. So with that, we thank the ambassador for his presence. Please, and
thank you.
And thank him for his generosity for providing a wonderful feast outside to celebrate the Year of the Dragon.
Yeah.
With this concludes this meeting. Thank you so much, Dr. Zhou.
Thank you. Hope you will enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.